Hello again and welcome back to our course on Excel 2013 Advanced. In this section we're going to look at text functions in Excel 2013. I'm going to assume that you have a basic knowledge of how to manipulate text in Excel, so you'll be familiar with things like concatenating text using the ampersand character or indeed the concatenate function. The concatenate function is one of those listed under the text functions in Excel Help. And what I'm going to concentrate on in this section is a case study. I've received some data with some rather badly presented text, and I'm going to look at ways of automating the cleaning up of that text using some of the more popular text functions. So let's get started. So the situation here is that I've received some employee data and I'm going to try to work out how to clean that data up. There are various problems with it. And here's the first 20 employees. Their details are each on a line. In fact, each of them is in a single cell. The cells are overflowing. And there are basically 5 pieces of information about each employee. There's a name. First guy is Jose Juarez. Then there is a value which I believe should be the start date with the company, but some of these have come through as numbers rather than dates. The numbers may well be the start dates in number format, but I'll need to look into that. Then I have another number which I believe is the annual salary. Then I have the department they work in. Now the department names are a bit sort of muddled up. There's admin, engineering, accounts, marketing, and then there's R&D. So there's a number of different departments involved there. And then finally I have the employee's role, their job title within that department, and Jose is an intern. So what I'm going to do is to clean this data up and separate it out into a properly structured worksheet. Now when I do this kind of exercise in front of other people, somebody always says, well, wouldn't it be quicker just to retype it? I'm using these 20 people as an example, and I need you to imagine that we've actually got thousands of employees presented like this, and we're trying to clean this up as automatically as we can for a very large number of employees. Now the order in which I do these things is actually quite important. There isn't only one way of doing it. But I want to do any of the general types of operation first. So before I split each of those lines up into its constituent parts, what I want to do is to do a couple of general things. And the first general thing I'm going to do is to convert the text to proper case. At the moment, whoever's presented this data or extracted it from a database has presented it all to me in uppercase, and I want to convert it to proper case, so with capital letters and so on. As with every other exercise we're going to perform on this data, it's very important to look at the results of what we do and try to identify any unforeseen glitches, problems, generic kinds of issues. So when we're trying to convert to proper case, we use the proper function, and we'll look carefully after we've applied the proper function to just check that everything seems to make sense. So the first job for me is to go down to right click on sheet 1, move or copy. I'm going to create a copy of this at the end, and that's my saved copy. That's basically a way of making sure that if all goes horribly wrong and I cannot recover back to where I was by doing undo and so on, I've got my saved copy back there. I could rename that to backup copy or something like that. Let's go back to sheet 1. Now what I'm going to do is to apply the proper function to A2. It's pretty straightforward, the proper function, because you just say equals proper and then you just enter the text. Now the text in this case will be A2. Tick that, and that is now converted to proper case. So Juarez Jose has now got capital J on both of the parts of his name. Admin becomes admin in proper case, intern in proper case, and so on. That's a pretty straightforward process to do to begin with. I'm going to fill down and then just have a little look through to see if there's anything there which strikes me as having caused a problem. Note that R&D, if you look in that cell there, note that R&D is taken as 2 capitals because of the spaces. Then Excel assumes that each of those is the beginning of a word, and of course decapitalization or capitalization does not affect punctuation characters. So there we are, that all looks good. Now it's time to make the first fundamental mistake, which is to think, oh, that's much better, let me get rid of column A. So I'm going to right click on A, click on delete, and of course I have a problem because what was in column B references column A, and I can't just delete column A. So that's hardly going to be a problem. Let's just take a copy of column B's contents and paste values into C. So I'm going to use the paste values there, and then I can get rid of columns A and B. Note that the proper function is one of a set of functions that converts case in Excel 2013. Lower converts to lowercase, upper to uppercase, and proper to proper case. Now we can look to see if there are any other kinds of general processing that we need to apply. I'm not going to do anything else in general now. The kinds of other changes I want to make, things like sorting out the names of the departments and so on, I'm going to do once I've split each row of data up into its columns. So the next thing to do is to start doing that split up of each row of data. Now rather conveniently in this case, the individual data items for each employee are separated by semicolon characters. So the key thing here is the position of the semicolon characters. Now generally speaking, once you've done what I'm going to do now a couple of times, you'll probably be able to do it in a much quicker way. But for the moment, for anybody who really hasn't done this kind of thing before, I'm going to break this down into 2 or 3 steps. The first question is this: if I wanted to split that up into its constituent parts, how would I, for example, locate the first part, the name of the employee? Well, the name of the employee is everything up to the first semicolon. So the first question I'm going to ask is, how far through that string of text in A2 is that first semicolon character? And the function we use to identify that is the find function. And the find function takes 3 arguments, and the third argument, a starting point, is optional. We're not going to need that this time. We basically say, which text are we trying to find? Well, we're looking for a semicolon character. And what do we want to find that text in? We want to find it within A2. So tick that, and it tells us that it is the 14th character in the text in that cell. So that's pretty good. Now there's something else we're going to need in just a moment, and that is I also need to know how long all of the text is, for reasons you'll see in just a moment. And the function that tells us how long a string of text is the len function. So if I put equals len, returns the number of characters in a character string. All I need to do is to put in the text string. This will be A2, tick that. It tells us there are 38 characters altogether. You'll see the use of that in just a moment. Now what I want to do is to identify that first part of the employee data, i.e. the name of the employee. And in order to do that, I use another function, the left function, which gives me a specified number of characters from the left of a string. So if I type in D2 here equals left, you'll see it has 2 arguments, the text that I want to extract the characters from, and then optionally the number of characters. I'll almost always specify the number of characters, by the way. So the text in this case is A2, and the number of characters I want, well, it isn't B2. I don't want the first 14 characters because I'd get the semicolon as well. What I really want is B2 minus 1 characters, because I don't want to include the semicolon. Tick that, and what I get is the name Juarez Jose. So that is the name of the employee. Now I also want to keep the rest of the information for later processing. So I want the rightmost part of the string as well, and the function to do that is, not surprisingly, the right function. Now the right function has two arguments. It has the text, which in this case will be A2 again. But how many characters do I want? Well, I want the total number minus the position of the first semicolon. So if you take this first example, I already know that there are 38 characters altogether in that string, and if I took out the first 14, I'd be left with 24 characters, and the 24 characters will be everything from that first 4 there up to the end. So the length I want is actually C2 minus B2. Tick that, and what I finish up with is everything except the name and the first semicolon. And that's basically how I strip that string into two parts. Let's just fill it down. Control D. And there we are. That's a pretty big job done pretty quickly. Now let me just give you a couple of hints and tips here. The first one is that when we did the process before, I then deleted the columns that I no longer needed. That isn't necessarily the best way to go about things. Many people just hide the columns that they've finished with. It makes it a little bit easier to go back and check what you've done, or perhaps correct what you've done if you've made a mistake. So by all means, instead of deleting these columns like A, B and C that we may no longer need, then you can just keep them. That also avoids the necessity of doing things like copy and doing paste values, so that you're not affected by the features of using formulae and references to columns that you no longer need. So very often I would approach this by just hiding the columns when I finish with each of them. The second point I'd like to make is that if you look at the way that we've calculated D2, the name of the first employee, using a left function, that left function has two arguments, A2, the contents of A2, and B2 minus 1. B2 actually uses the find function, so let me just copy that part. Let me go back into here, and instead of B2, let me just paste in here that find function. What I've now done there is to nest the find function inside the left function. Now many people would argue that that actually saves you one step. You no longer need B2 because you're going straight from A2 to D2, and of course it gives you the same answer. But my argument here would be that it does make what's in D2 just that bit more complicated. Many people try to do these things in as few steps as possible, and as a consequence finish up with pretty complicated formulae and use of functions. I generally find it's easier to both do what you're doing and understand later on what you've done if you break it into steps as I have here. You can easily hide the steps by hiding the columns or subsequently deleting the columns when you no longer need them, but I do think doing it step by step in the end produces results more quickly. So let's now look at column E. Column E is now still details of each employee, but with the employee names now stripped out. What I'm going to do now is to strip out the remaining fields or attributes for each of the employees. So I'm going to create 4 more columns, very similar way to the way that we've just done it. So again, I'm going to work on column E this time. I'm going to look for the first semicolon, create a new column, then the salary, new column, then the department, new column, then the job title, new column. Now there's no point in me doing that with you watching me, because you should know how to do that by now. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to take this particular workbook and get it ready for the next section where we'll carry on working with text functions. So please join me for that.